On June 17th, American President Donald Trump and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian signed a historic Memorandum of Understanding. The goal to abruptly halt a devastating kinetic conflict that had pushed the Middle East to the brink of absolute catastrophe. Initially scheduled to be signed 48 hours later in neutral Switzerland, both Washington and Tehran fast-tracked the process. The reason was purely strategic. The Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical maritime oil choke point, had to reopen immediately. As commercial vessels begin to cautiously navigate these contested waters, once more crude oil prices have plummeted, dipping below $70 a barrel for the first time since hostilities erupted. To the casual observer, a wave of optimism is sweeping global markets. The war, it seems, is over. But in the realm of military strategy, a ceasefire is rarely the end of the conflict. Often it is merely the repositioning of forces. And inside Iran, this peace deal has exposed a massive, potentially fatal fracture within the regime's command structure. While international observers point to a public consensus in Israel where over 90% of the population believes Iran walked away with a strategic victory, the reality inside Tehran is entirely different. For Iran's hardline military factions, this agreement isn't a victory, it is an act of treason. Immediately following the announcement, angry crowds flooded the streets of Tehran. But they weren't protesting Western imperialism, they were calling for the execution of their own chief negotiators, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. The protesters invoked the memory of former Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who was liquidated in the opening American precision strikes of the war. To these hardliners, the deal is a direct insult to their martyrdom doctrine. In a state where unauthorized dissent is met with brutal kinetic force, the fact that these protests were permitted to happen indicates one thing: the agitators have immense institutional backing from high-ranking military and political figures. At the tip of this spear is Mahmoud Nabavian, vice chairman of the Parliament's National Security Commission. Nabavian publicly declared that the agreement transforms the Islamic Republic into a de facto colony of the United States. He even claimed it opens the Strait of Hormuz to the Israeli Navy. To escalate the crisis, Nabavian appeared on state television reading what he claimed was classified correspondence from the new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei, suggesting the negotiating team had exceeded their constitutional mandate. Though the broadcast was abruptly cut and the footage scrubbed from state archives within an hour, the damage was done. This organized resistance is driven by the Paydari Front, or the Front of Islamic Revolution Stability. These are the super-revolutionaries, ideological purists who view any compromise with the West as a catastrophic capitulation akin to the humiliating 1828 Treaty of Turkmenchay. Their military doctrine dictates that a favorable peace can only be secured through the total battlefield defeat of the United States. However, looking at the raw military data, this stance is completely disconnected from operational reality. Let's analyze the military calculus that the hardliners are deliberately ignoring. The American air campaign was not just punitive, it was a highly coordinated multi-domain degradation of Iran's anti-access/area denial, or A2/AD capabilities. During the initial phases of the war, CENTCOM, strategic bombers, and carrier-based strike groups systematically dismantled Iran's integrated air defense network. Western intelligence estimates suggest that over 70% of Iran's long-range surface-to-air missile batteries, including their prized Russian-supplied S-300 systems and indigenous Corded-15 networks, were completely neutralized. This left Iranian airspace entirely vulnerable to stealth platforms like the F-35 and B-2 Spirit. Furthermore, Iran's asymmetric naval strategy in the Strait of Hormuz has been severely crippled. The IRGC Navy relies heavily on swarming tactics using fast attack craft anti-ship cruise missile sites and midget submarines. Months of sustained strikes shattered this infrastructure. Dozens of concealed coastal missile silos were eliminated via subterranean bunker busters, and a significant portion of the IRGC's surface fleet now sits at the bottom of the Persian Gulf. Logistically, the domestic defense industry responsible for manufacturing the infamous Shahed drones and Fateh ballistic missiles suffered critical infrastructure hits. Iran was running dangerously low on precision-guided munitions, and its proxy network, the axis of resistance, was facing severe supply chain bottlenecks. President Pezeshkian and the pragmatists understood a fundamental truth that the Paydari Front refuses to acknowledge. From a purely conventional and logistical standpoint, Iran's military machine was facing imminent collapse. Continuing the war would not result in a glorious Islamic victory. It would result in the total structural dismantling of the regime. The current internal crisis highlights a structural vulnerability within Tehran, a massive leadership vacuum. The new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, has not been seen in public since the war began, forcing him to rule entirely through proxies. Without the undisputed unifying authority of the elder Khamenei, the deep factionalism within the Iranian state is spilling directly into the public domain. Navigating these complex geopolitical fractures requires access to uncompromised tactical data. That is exactly why we built Fronts.co, our premium platform dedicated to deep-tier military analysis. We've recently upgraded our platform to bring you monthly cinematic long-form military documentaries. Our inaugural feature is an 80-minute investigation into the evolving strategic posture of North Korea's ballistic missile program. We also publish exclusive expert-written articles 3 times a week breaking down everything from modern armored warfare doctrines to Western logistics. Check out our latest open access piece debunking the myth regarding Russian armor depletion. Can the hardliners successfully tank this peace deal? The answer depends entirely on the actions of Iran's adversaries, Washington and Jerusalem. On its own, the Paydari Front is a minority faction, but they are being handed powerful political ammunition by external events. The first major flashpoint is Lebanon. While the ceasefire agreement dictates a cessation of hostilities across all fronts, the Israel Defense Forces have continued intense kinetic operations against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Because Israel is not a signatory to the U.S.-Iran memorandum, Jerusalem feels unbound by its terms. For Iranian hardliners, this is proof that the deal fails to protect Iran's most critical strategic proxy. The second variable is the volatile rhetoric of Donald Trump. Following a brief reimposition of maritime restrictions by the IRGC, Trump threatened on social media to bomb Tehran harder than ever before, and even suggested kidnapping or neutralizing Iranian negotiators. While the Iranian delegation briefly walked out of the Swiss talks in protest, they ultimately returned without receiving an American apology. To the hardliners, this represents a spineless capitulation by Pezeshkian's government. This economic dispute is critical. If the funds are released unconditionally, a fierce domestic battle will erupt over how to allocate the windfall. The IRGC and the hardliners will demand every dollar be injected into defense procurement to replace the air defense network's drones and naval assets lost during the war. Conversely, the pragmatists want to reinvest in the failing domestic economy to prevent a resurgence of violent internal anti-regime protests. To make matters worse, intelligence leaks suggest that Trump plans to demand a much harsher renegotiation of the deal once the U.S. midterm elections conclude, threatening a return to total war if Tehran refuses. This entirely validates the hardline narrative that Washington is fundamentally incapable of negotiating in good faith. Ultimately, the Iranian regime is entering its most dangerous post-war chapter. It is a government that has survived severe external kinetic strikes, yet remains deeply broken from within. To maintain control, Tehran has quietly accelerated its domestic apparatus of repression, executing over 100 citizens in the month of June alone. As billions of dollars hang in the balance, the pragmatists and the super-revolutionaries remain locked in an existential struggle for the soul of the Islamic Republic. But history reminds us that when the survival of the regime is threatened, internal factions will always unite to unleash ultimate violence against their own people. The war with the West may be cooling down, but the battle for the future of Iran has only just begun. Thank you for watching. For more deep dive military analyses, make sure to subscribe and click the bell notification icon. Let us know your thoughts on this peace deal in the comments below.